Hello, my friends. Welcome back to Timeless Stories. I hope you are having a peaceful day. Today, I want to share a story with you. A story about a man who did not lead an army. He did not build a kingdom. He did not rule a great empire. But he changed the world with something very small. Words. Simple words. Soft words. Painful words, funny words, words spoken on a wooden stage, words written by candlelight, words that made people laugh, words that made people cry, words that helped people understand their own hearts. Can you imagine that? One man, born in a small English town more than 400 years ago, still lives today every time people open a book, stand on a stage, watch a film, or speak certain English phrases without even knowing where they came from. His name was William Shakespeare, and here is the beautiful thing about his life. Shakespeare did not just write about kings, queens, love, jealousy, dreams, and death. He wrote about us, about fear, about hope, about mistakes, about ambition, about young love, about old regret, about the strange and wonderful human heart. That is why his words are still alive. And near the end of this story, I will share one surprising detail many people never hear. A detail about how we almost lost many of Shakespeare's greatest plays forever. If that had happened, the world of English, theater, and storytelling would be very different today. So stay with me until the end. Take a deep breath, relax your shoulders, and let us travel back in time together. This is the story of William Shakespeare, the boy from a small town who gave the world a language of feeling. Our story begins in England in the year 1564. In a small market town called Stratford-upon-Avon, a baby boy was born. The town was quiet. There was a river. There were narrow streets. There were small houses, busy shops, church bells, horses, carts, and people who knew one another by name. This was not London. This was not the center of power. It was a simple town in the English countryside. But sometimes history begins in quiet places. The baby's name was William Shakespeare. His father was John Shakespeare. John worked with leather. He made gloves, sold goods, and became an important man in the town for a time. His mother was Mary Arden. She came from a farming family with land. William was one of several children. Life in those days was not easy. There were no cars. There was no electricity. There were no phones. There were no modern hospitals. People lived close to the land. They worked hard. They feared sickness. They depended on family, neighbors, faith, and luck. A child in Shakespeare's time grew up quickly. The world was beautiful, but it was also dangerous. Illness could come suddenly. Food could be limited. A family's fortune could rise and fall. And yet, in that small town, young William began to see the world around him. He saw traders in the market. He heard church sermons. He watched festivals and local plays. He listened to the voices of ordinary people, farmers, mothers, children, workers, travelers, old men telling stories, young people laughing in the street. Maybe he did not know it yet, but he was collecting human voices. One day, those voices would become kings, fools, lovers, ghosts, soldiers, dreamers, and broken-hearted fathers. When William was a boy, he probably went to the local grammar school. We cannot know every detail for certain because many records from his early life are missing. But boys from families like his often studied there. The school day was long. The lessons were strict. Children learned Latin. They read old Roman writers. They practiced grammar. They memorized speeches. They learned how words could be arranged, repeated, sharpened, and made beautiful. For many children, this kind of study may have felt difficult and tiring. But for William, language became something more. Words were not just schoolwork. Words were music. Words were pictures. Words were doors. With words, a poor man could sound like a king. With words, a quiet room could become a battlefield. With words, a person could show the secret feelings of the heart. This was Shakespeare's great gift. He listened deeply. He noticed things. He understood that a single sentence could carry love, anger, fear, or hope. But William's family did not stay comfortable forever. His father began to have money problems. The family's position became less secure, and William did not go to university. He did not become a scholar in the usual way. He did not have the kind of education that some richer men had. But sometimes, the end of school is not the end of learning. Some people learn from books. Some people learn from streets. Some people learn from silence. Some people learn from pain. William Shakespeare learned from everything. He learned from Latin books. He learned from the Bible. He learned from old stories. He learned from people talking. He learned from watching life. And slowly, inside him, a world of language was growing. When William was 18 years old, his life changed. He married Anne Hathaway. Anne was about 26 years old. She was 8 years older than William, which was noticeable but not impossible in those times. Soon, they had a daughter named Susanna. Then, a few years later, they had twins, a boy named Hamlet and a girl named Judith. Now William was not only a young man with dreams, he was a husband. He was a father. He had responsibilities. He needed work. He needed money. He needed a future. But Stratford was a small town. There were limits there. A young man with a restless mind may have looked beyond the quiet streets and wondered what else the world could offer. Then comes one of the most mysterious parts of Shakespeare's life, the lost years. For several years, history becomes quiet. We do not know exactly where he was or what he did. Some people have guessed that he worked as a teacher. Some have guessed that he joined traveling actors. Some have guessed other stories. But we do not know for sure. History sometimes leaves empty spaces, and those empty spaces can make a life feel even more human. because all of us have years that other people do not see. Years of struggle. Years of learning. Years when we are becoming something. But no one is watching yet. For Shakespeare, those silent years led him away from Stratford. They led him to London. London was the great city. It was noisy, crowded, dirty, dangerous, full of smell, smoke, disease, money, ambition, and possibility. The streets were alive with sellers, horses, beggars, nobles, workers, thieves, and travelers. People came to London to make a life. Some found success. Some disappeared. London could give you a dream, and London could break your heart. But London had something Stratford did not have: theaters. In Shakespeare's time, theater was becoming one of the most exciting forms of entertainment in England. People loved plays. They came to laugh. They came to cry. They came to see battles, ghosts, kings, fools, lovers, and magic. Rich people came. Poor people came. Educated people came. Ordinary workers came. For a few hours, people from different worlds stood under the same sky and listened to the same story. This was very powerful. A theater was not just a building. It was a place where human life became visible. At first, Shakespeare was not famous. He was not the great name we know today. He was a young man from a small town trying to find his place in a hard city. Maybe he helped behind the scenes. Maybe he acted in small roles. Maybe he watched other writers. Maybe he learned how actors moved, how audiences reacted, how laughter rose, how silence fell. This was important. Shakespeare was not just a writer sitting far away from the stage. He understood the theater from the inside. He knew that words had to live in the mouth. A sentence had to be speakable. A scene had to move. A character had to feel real in front of hundreds of people. Slowly, Shakespeare began to write. And slowly, people began to listen. By the early 1590s, his name was known in London. Some other writers noticed him. Some admired him. Some may have felt jealous. But Shakespeare kept working. He wrote plays that people wanted to see. He wrote history plays about English kings. He wrote comedies filled with mistaken identity, love, jokes, and happy endings. He wrote tragedies where human weakness led to terrible pain. He wrote poems and sonnets about beauty, time, love, aging, and memory. What made Shakespeare special was not only the stories he told. Many of his stories came from older tales, history books, legends, and other sources. His real power was the way he told them. He gave old stories new life. He made characters feel human. A king was not only a king, he was a man with fear. A villain was not only evil, he was a person with desire. A lover was not only romantic, he was young, impatient, hopeful, and blind. A fool was not only funny, he often spoke the truth. This is why Shakespeare's people feel alive. They are not flat, they are not simple, they are full of light and shadow, just like real people. He wrote Romeo and Juliet, a story of young love trapped between two angry families. It is beautiful because the love feels fresh. It is tragic because the hate around them is older and stronger than they are. He wrote Hamlet, the story of a prince who cannot easily act because his mind is full of questions. Hamlet thinks, doubts, suffers, and asks what life means. He wrote Macbeth, a dark story about ambition. Macbeth wants power. But the more power he takes, the less peace he has. He wrote Othello, a story about love, trust, jealousy, and destruction. He wrote King Lear, a painful story about age, pride, family, and loss. He wrote A Midsummer Night's Dream, where love becomes strange and magical in a forest at night. And he wrote The Tempest, a late play full of storms, forgiveness, power, and letting go. Each play was different. But again and again, Shakespeare returned to one question. What does it mean to be human? To love and lose, to hope and fear, to want too much, to forgive too late, to speak and be misunderstood, to dream of greatness, to face death. These were not only English questions, they were human questions. That is why his plays could travel across countries and centuries. If this slow story is helping you listen to English more naturally, please stay with us here at Timeless Stories. We travel through history, not only to learn about the past, but also to understand ourselves a little better. As Shakespeare became more successful, he joined a company of actors called the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Later, when King James came to the English throne, the group became known as the King's Men. This was a very important company. They performed for ordinary people. They also performed for the royal court. Shakespeare was not only the writer, he was also an actor and a shareholder in the company. This meant he had a business interest in the theater. He was an artist, but he was also practical. He understood money. He understood audiences. He understood that stories needed to touch people, but they also needed to bring people through the door. In 1599, Shakespeare's company built a famous theater called the Globe. The Globe Theater was round. It was made of wood. It was open to the sky. During the day, sunlight fell on the stage. If it rained, many people got wet, but still, they came. The poor audience members stood near the stage. They were called groundlings. They could shout, laugh, react, and become part of the energy of the play. Richer people sat in galleries around the theater. There were no microphones. There were no movie cameras. There were no electric lights. Only actors, voices, costumes, music, imagination, and words. Think about that for a moment. A wooden stage, a crowd waiting. A young actor steps forward. The air becomes quiet. Then the first line is spoken. And suddenly, the audience is not in London anymore. They are in ancient Rome. They are in a castle in Denmark. They are in a dark, Scottish night. They are in a magical forest. They are in the mind of a person who is afraid, in love, angry, lost, or full of hope. That was the power of Shakespeare's theater. It made invisible things visible. During these years, Shakespeare worked very hard. He wrote many plays. He acted. He helped manage the company. He invested. He bought property. In 1597, he bought a large house in Stratford called New Place. This was a sign of success. The boy from the small town had done well. He had made money in London and brought honor back to his family. But success did not protect him from sadness. In 1596, Shakespeare's only son, Hamlet, died. Hamlet was only 11 years old. For any parent, this is a deep wound. We do not have Shakespeare's private diary. We do not have a letter where he explains his pain, so we must be careful. We cannot say exactly what he felt or how it changed his writing. But we can imagine the silence in a father's heart after losing a child. We can imagine the empty place at the family table. We can imagine the name that was no longer called in the house. And after Hamlet's death, Shakespeare continued to write some of the deepest works in English literature. Works about grief, fathers and children, death and memory, love and loss. Maybe this is one reason his writing feels so true. He did not write from a perfect life. He wrote from a human life, a life with work, ambition, family, distance, success, and sorrow. As the years passed, Shakespeare's plays became more complex. The early plays often had speed, humor, and bold energy. Later plays carried more darkness and wisdom. In Hamlet, a young man stands between action and thought. In Macbeth, ambition becomes poison. In King Lear, an old father loses power and discovers the pain of love too late. In The Tempest, an older man learns to let go. These stories do not give easy answers. They ask us to listen. They ask us to look at ourselves. This is why Shakespeare does not feel dead. Even after 400 years, his characters still speak to us. A person today may never live in a castle, but they know jealousy, they know doubt, they know family conflict, they know the fear of failure. They know the wish to be loved. They know the pain of making a wrong choice. Shakespeare understood that clothes change. Cities change. Languages change. But the human heart does not change as much as we think. Shakespeare also helped shape the English language. It is not correct to say that he simply invented every word people connect with him. Language is more complicated than that. Some words may have existed before him. Some were first recorded in his works. Some became more famous because he used them so powerfully. But there is no doubt that Shakespeare played with English in a way that changed it. He created phrases. He joined words. He used old words in new ways. He made English flexible, musical, and emotional. Today, many English expressions connected with Shakespeare are still used. People say phrases like, break the ice, wild goose chase, or heart of gold. Many people do not know these phrases have a connection to Shakespeare's plays. That is the strange beauty of language. Sometimes history is hiding inside the words we use every day. When you learn English, you are not only learning grammar. You are touching centuries of stories. You are touching voices from people who lived long before us. You are touching Shakespeare, even if you do not know it. After many years in London, Shakespeare spent more time back in Stratford. He was older now. He had worked hard. He had become respected. He had earned enough money to live comfortably. He had seen theaters rise. He had seen audiences cheer. He had seen the power of his own words. Around 1613, something dramatic happened. During a performance of the play Henry VIII, a cannon used for a special stage effect misfired. Burning material from the cannon landed on the thatched roof of the Globe Theatre. The wooden building burned down in about an hour. Thankfully, no one was killed. The theater was later rebuilt. But the burning of the Globe feels symbolic. The stage that had carried so many of Shakespeare's dreams was suddenly gone in flames. And around this time, Shakespeare's writing life was coming to an end. He returned to Stratford, where his story had begun. There is something moving about that. A man leaves a small town. He goes to the great city. He works. He struggles. He becomes famous. He changes the world. And then, near the end, he comes home. William Shakespeare died in 1616. He was 52 years old. He was buried in Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon, the same town where he had been born. His body stayed there, but his words did not stay in Stratford. They traveled across England, across Europe, across oceans, across centuries. Actors spoke them. Readers studied them. Students struggled with them. Teachers explained them. Filmmakers adapted them. Writers learned from them. And people from many countries found themselves inside his stories. Now, earlier in this story, I promised to share one surprising detail many people never hear. A detail about how we almost lost many of Shakespeare's greatest plays forever. Here it is. When Shakespeare died, not all of his plays were safely published in one complete book. In those days, plays were often treated as working scripts for theater companies. They were not always seen as great literature that needed to be protected forever. Some plays were printed during his lifetime, but many were not. 7 years after Shakespeare's death, in 1623, 2 of his fellow actors and friends, John Heminges and Henry Condell, helped collect and publish many of his plays in a large book. Today, we call this book the First Folio. The First Folio contained 36 plays. Of those 36 plays, 18 had never been published before. Without the First Folio, those 18 plays would most likely have been lost forever. Think about that. Macbeth, Julius Caesar, The Tempest, Twelfth Night, and other great works might never have reached us. The world almost lost a large part of Shakespeare. not because the words were weak, but because paper is fragile, memory is fragile, theater is temporary. A play exists in a moment, then the moment disappears. But because his friends cared enough to collect his work, Shakespeare's voice continued. This is a quiet but powerful lesson. Great stories do not survive by accident alone. Someone must remember. Someone must write. Someone must protect. Someone must pass them on. And now, every time we read Shakespeare, watch his plays, or hear his phrases, we are receiving a gift that almost disappeared. This makes his story even more beautiful. Because Shakespeare wrote about time, and time almost swallowed his own work. But it did not. His words survived, and they are still speaking. So why does Shakespeare matter today? He matters because he reminds us that language is alive. He reminds us that stories can cross borders. He reminds us that a person from a small town can touch the whole world. He reminds us that human feelings are not new. People 400 years ago loved, feared, dreamed, lied, laughed, cried, and made mistakes. Just like us, different clothes, different streets, different world. But the same human heart. And for English learners, Shakespeare's story has another meaning. Maybe English feels difficult sometimes. Maybe some words feel strange. Maybe listening takes effort. Maybe you feel slow. But remember this. Language is not only a test. Language is a bridge. Every word you learn helps you enter another world. Every story you understand gives you a little more confidence. Every sentence you hear clearly is a small victory. Shakespeare spent his life showing the power of words. And you, by listening today, are also building your own world with words. Slowly, patiently. One story at a time. William Shakespeare was not perfect. No great historical person is simple. His world was different from ours. His life had mysteries we cannot fully explain, but his gift was real. He took the language around him and made it shine. He took old stories and gave them new breath. He looked at human beings and saw their comedy, their beauty, their weakness, and their pain. He understood that a king can be afraid, a fool can be wise. A young lover can be brave, a powerful man can destroy himself. An old father can learn too late, and a simple word can live longer than stone. That is the wonder of Shakespeare. He did not build a palace. He built a world of language, and we are still walking inside it. More than 400 years later, somewhere in the world, an actor is speaking his lines. A student is opening one of his plays. A teacher is explaining a phrase. A writer is learning from his rhythm. A person is saying an English expression. Without knowing it, carries a small echo of Shakespeare. His body returned to the earth, but his words kept traveling. From a small town beside a river, to a wooden theater in London, to books, classrooms, stages, and screens across the world. His life tells us that words matter. Stories matter. The human voice matters. And maybe In our own small way, each of us has words that someone else needs to hear. If this story touched you, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments. Which part of William Shakespeare's life stayed with you the most? Was it the quiet boy in Stratford, learning the music of words? Was it the wooden globe theater, filled with rich and poor people listening under the same sky? Or was it the surprising truth that many of his greatest plays almost disappeared forever? If this story helped you learn, feel, or listen to English more naturally, please like this video and subscribe to Timeless Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you calm, meaningful stories from history, told in slow and simple English. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Until next time, my friends, take care of yourselves. Keep listening, keep learning, and keep discovering the beautiful stories that still speak to us across time. This is Timeless Stories, and I will see you in the next journey.